60, 90 days ago, when the HHS recommended to the DEA that cannabis be rescheduled, we saw a lot of these tier 2 companies actually they ripped more than any other stock. Are you starting to see that same trend in the event that we do get some sort of announcement regarding the DEA relatively soon?
I don't think it has really implications on if we're going to get the announcement or not, but I mean, it's kind of looking like a precursor. I mean, Air was up another 13% today. Jushi was up another 12% today. Cresco is up another 10% today. I mean, that trend or that trend that was called out by Sammy, that kind of really got my attention. And I mean, I kind of looked into it and he was spot on with what was going on. I mean, the 1 week performance of Air's 45%, Jushi 73%, Cresco 27%. GTI 9.5, True Leaf 12, Verano 20, TerraSend 10. So those tier 2s and tier 3s, they are outperforming on a relative basis, especially on the week chart. And I mean, that trend with volume is continuing today. Top of my screen, it's Air, SNDL, Jushi, Cannabis, Cresco, Tilt, and then you've got GTI.
What cannabis? Cannabis, they got their earnings tomorrow morning.
Cannabis earnings are out tomorrow before the bell. They're trading 10%. They're up 10% right now on 550,000 shares traded today. And let's not forget that they were a victim of forced selling by that fund blowing up in Canada about 2 weeks ago that everybody found out about day after we started to see the immense sell pressure in the name. So, I mean, yeah, those tier 2s and tier 3s are continuing that trend and they're outperforming everybody else on a relative basis.
And the debt announcement back in September, that price was $1.53, was it? If I remember correctly. The raise
that they did. I think it was at about $1, somewhere between $1.40 and $1.50. Was that raise that was announced, which they're now trading at 45 cents a share.
Yeah. Is this another indicator that if we get some sort of news that, again, stocks will rip and this is all driven by retail? Because I don't think institutions, from what I'm hearing, they will get in eventually. But even if the DEA were to announce and approve a rescheduling, I still think that it's going to be a while before institutions step in. Or do you guys disagree with that?
I think you got 12 to 18 months after they actually announce Schedule 3 before institutions step in.
Yeah.
If they announced it tomorrow, I mean, we were talking about this earlier with Anthony from New Lake. You're going to have legal challenges. You're going to have the actual rules and regs need to be written and then implemented. And institutions, it's a custody issue. It's not whether they want to, it's the fact that they can't. Yeah. So, I mean, if their compliance department tells them, hey, we can't hold this paper, or hey, we can't get access to this paper via our transfer agent or our clearinghouse, there's nothing they can do. They can't buy the paper, even if it is descheduled. I mean, until the custody issue is solved, institutions will not come in. So that is not happening anytime soon.
So remember that. It's not so much that they don't want to, they just can't. And I assume that you're in full agreement with that, Ben?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It has nothing to do with them not wanting to get in. In fact, we hear that some people in the industry are getting their own positions. They're building their own positions personally, but they can't from an institutional perspective. These are people who work at investment banks and so forth, right? So people want to get in personally, but until the plumbing is fixed on the exchanges, they simply cannot. I mean, the covenants in a lot of funds, growth funds or small cap funds or whatnot, simply cannot own OTC stocks. Full stop. So it has no bearing on whether they want to. I'm sure they do, but they just can't.
Yeah. Player one, hello from Tampa. We got people from Italy that are coming in here today. That's Sagida. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. But yeah, happy Monday to everybody out there. This is the TDR Traded Black podcast here on the Benzenga Television Network. I'm your host, Shad Dales, with Benjamin A. Smith and Anthony Varrell. This is segment number 1, Into the Wire, where we headline basically the biggest headlines of the day in cannabis, psychedelics, and crypto. Let's now switch to headline number 2 in Washington, where, as I said off the top, the head of the HHS outlined that his agency is uniquely positioned to update the science to ensure that drugs are properly classified under federal law. Timing of this is interesting, Ben. So you want to elaborate a little bit more on what this could mean?
Yeah, this came during a hearing before the Senate Appropriations Committee. That's going to be held on Wednesday. And a senator, his name is Martin Hendrick from New Mexico, asked Secretary Becerra whether about the descheduling process. He didn't mention cannabis specifically, but he asked him about the, House agency's role in the CSA, the Controlled Substance Act, and how they amend that. And that's when he made the comment, Becerra did, about updating the science and being uniquely positioned to do that. So I don't think this is any huge revelation or necessarily an actionable event, but we can infer from those comments that they're gathering all the data that they have to be able to submit to the DEA so that they can make a reasonable decision. And I guess we can infer that they, support this, actually more than infer. They recommended it. So you would assume that, the scientific reports that they're giving to the DEA are mostly favorable, or a lot of them will be. And they're just, I guess they're going to put all sorts of scientific reports, good and bad, but they're definitely going to have a key role in whether the DEA acts.
I know that you guys broke out the states, your top 5 markets for the first time on the earnings report. Thank you for doing that. It makes our jobs easier, and it gives us some insight into the business. One thing that I was surprised of was to see Colorado on there.
Mm-hmm.
What's your take on Colorado? I mean, a lot of people forget about that market, but I mean, obviously it is important to the overall enterprise. And I mean, is it something that people should be paying attention to?
Look, I think, everyone thinks about Florida because that's where a lot of
They do, don't they?
Yeah, they really do. And they should. But guess what's $1.8 billion market? Colorado. And guess what's the most fragmented market in the United States? Colorado. And guess what's one of the best regulated markets in the United States? Colorado. So you think about what's happened in Colorado over the past couple of years. You've seen rationalization, consolidation occur because the markets are efficient, right? They pushed a lot of people out of that industry and out of that business. That sort of stable footing is now in place. And what we see in Colorado is a lot of consolidation happening. We now, for the first time, have wholesale relationships with other large operators in the marketplace. And, look, we're the largest operator in Colorado, and we have, less than 10% market share. There's so much room for us to grow there. And it's profitable. And it's frankly, it could be a high growth market if we dedicated the resources, which we are. So we're actually very excited about it because no one else is paying attention. And, candidly, being a bit contrarian is how we've always built the business.
Everything that's old is new again in Colorado, right?
That's right.
It's a good way of looking at it. So you got to love the online world. Like, why are they not like top 5 in the state of Florida? Because like you said, everybody is so fixated on that market. And if you get adult use, it could be arguably the largest cannabis market perhaps in the world. But if you're sitting in front of a group of investors, like, what's the message and the focal point that you want to communicate to your investor base on the footprint in the states that you're actually building and getting a bigger and bigger market share pertaining to it?
So look, we're focused on markets where there are real barriers to competitors, where there's real regulation, where there's real upside, and where we can really accentuate our differences, right? Our sustainable advantages. Ohio is a perfect example. New York is a perfect example. New Jersey is a perfect example. Maryland is a perfect example. All those markets are growing, head over heels, and we're there to capture that. Many of them haven't yet transitioned, which is a huge opportunity in the future for us. If you look at Florida, for us, it's a saturated market. It's not a bad market. It's a very good market, but it's a very competitive market. And if I look at it from a return perspective, one dispensary in New Jersey, if you look just on an absolute basis, simple math, is worth 5 to 7 dispensaries in Florida. So if I'm going to put dollars to work, I'm going to put it to work in a market where I can really generate that cash flow.
Interesting. You want to ask something?
Yeah, I was going to say with obviously one of the things that stood out was the gross profit for the quarter. We're seeing it was down year over year. I think upon second look at that, a lot of it could be attributed to the Cresco acquisition. I mean, so that was a big knee-jerk reaction from a lot of retail investors. They saw the number, they were like not really giving it rationalization, but just went right after it. I mean, what's your comment in regards to that?
A good point, right? For them. Explain like what's...
I think the most important message you can take away from the way our business performed in that context is that our profitability actually went up. So gross margin went down, EBITDA went up on a margin basis. And I think that anytime you can see that type of discipline on an operating basis, it shows you that what's happening at the top level is worth a look, but they're managing the business appropriately. Now, for the gross margin, look, we made decisions that were the right decisions at the time based on a transaction we thought was going to go through. We had a number of assets that were being sold independently. We thought the whole business was being sold independently. And now we need to fix some of that thing, some of that decision making, which is what you saw this quarter. You'll see a little bit more next quarter. But what it allows us to do, I think, is demonstrate in 24 a massive ramp in gross margin, right? So all of the scale that we're talking about
your
adding.
Position, you feel confidently.
Very good. Very good. Because not only do we have a very clear line of sight on gross margin, and I'll give you an example. 500 basis points of gross margin relates to absorption accounting, which means we have underutilized cultivation assets because we built out in anticipation of this changeover to adult use. That's happening now in Ohio. That's happening now in Virginia. We believe now that the legislature's changed hands. That's happening right now in New York. So all that capacity that was effectively pre-funded was very expensive for us to maintain, but it's the coiled spring that's going to drive profitability and growth going forward.
Yeah. So we wrapped up the 3-day business trip in NYC. We attended a prominent cannabis and psychedelic conference, and needless to say, the topic of conversation was the DEA's announcement concerning rescheduling. We spoke to some influential people while we were there, Anthony, and the big takeaway I received was that rescheduling is going to happen, and it could happen end of Q1 2024 or perhaps early Q2 2024. So first off, who did you speak with, Anthony, and do you believe that timeline?
Yeah, I mean, it was great. I mean, Noah brought out a pretty engaged and authoritative audience. I mean, I was speaking to everybody from lobbyists that are directly in DC right now drafting legislation as it relates to this, working with key senators and members of government, family offices. There were some hedge fund managers there, and there were also some industry people that was there. The sentiment was very positive. I mean, everyone firmly does believe, and these are all insiders with connections, that Schedule 3 is coming. However, everybody had their own view on time frame. I heard as late as the end of Q2, end of Q1, end of the year. I think the timing is as good as anybody's guess. Obviously, we've heard from a lot of the CEOs on these earnings calls that they're expecting a announcement from the DEA by year's end. That would be great. I've been cautiously optimistic and said that there's an above average chance that happens, but I'm sticking to my guns that we get it sometime before March or the end of Q1 of next year. So, I mean, that's what I've been saying for a while, and that's what I'm definitely sticking to.
Yeah, good point.
So that 90-day timeline that has been floating around,
that was fallacy. That was fallacy. I called it a while ago that was not fact. That's not fact. The DEA does not have to respond within 90 days.
Okay.
That is a fallacy.
It's amazing how that, even though some people have refuted that, I know you've done that on Twitter as well. It's going around, and people largely believe that, or a large segment of investors believe that. So
it's a nice thing to believe. It's a nice thing to believe. I mean, if you really are of the school of thought that there is some 90-day timeline that's out there that the DEA has to respond to, we're sitting in that sweet spot where I think we're about 10 days away from that 90-day window elapsing. If I wanted to form my own opinion and think that was fact, it'd be nice. But I don't think that we get something by the 27th of November.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving's next week. Politicians are, and the DEA is not going to be in office.
Yeah, and then you segue into the month of December, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of stuff that we learned, but for the most part, I think one positive sign as well, not to sit here and say that anything we just mentioned about was negative, but it's great. But we were speaking to a couple of lobbyists, don't know how accurate it is, but they strongly believe that they think 280E rescheduling and safe banking could happen and should happen before the next election, which really grabbed my attention. It's going to take some time, but interesting to say that if that were to happen, if it does, wow, it'll be incredible, obviously, for this industry.
Well, yeah, Schedule 3 repeals 280 overnight.
Yeah.
So with the Schedule 3 announcement, 280 is gone.
Yeah.
As 280 is heavily predicated on the Schedule 1 status of the drugs. And then it'd be nice that safe would be icing on the cake. And then if we get any FinCEN movement with what Elizabeth Warren went with earlier in the week, that'd be fantastic. That'd be a triple threat. That'd be best case scenario.
Yeah. That's for sure. Lots we learned, too, on how the landscape in Washington goes towards this industry. There's a lot of stuff that is beyond our wildest imaginations as to like what's involved, but there's so many moving parts to this. It's not just one dimensional, and they got to have a lot of ways get stuff done incrementally. But to get stuff done incrementally, you have to look almost at a comprehensive point of view. But lots we learned, to say the least. But it was a good 3 days, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, very much so. I mean, the thing that my main takeaway from speaking with the lobbyists that we were speaking to, who from the looks of it is pretty connected in Washington, is that they actually draft legislation not with the They don't solely draft legislation in hopes of getting it passed. They draft legislation so it goes on to certain politicians' desks and it gets the wheels spinning, and it gives them some sort of framework as to progress current bills, influence future bills. They draft legislation to influence, not necessarily to get passed. Which we've seen with things like the Climb Act, with things like the CARE Act. We've seen several pieces of legislation that are out there that we see at face value. We think, well, that doesn't really have a chance of passing. Truth be told, it doesn't necessarily need to pass. It's meant there to get the wheel spinning and influence the politicians that are reading it. If for reasons unbeknownst, they wouldn't be thinking about cannabis in the first place.
One of the things we learned too, Ben, is that, as much as like we're trying to get legalization for cannabis, rescheduling needs to be walked before we run, because even from a business aspect, we really have to get down to the nuts and bolts of this and making sure that we're fully prepared, because they don't want to roll out across the country similar to what happened in New York, which is why it's taking a little bit more time. But I think that's a smart move, making sure that this is set up the right way, needless to say.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, a lot of people don't realize how many moving parts there is that goes into these bills, and they think, well, why don't they just, politicians just pass it and then it gets magically done overnight? A lot of different things that go into this, and inputs and so forth. So that last thing we need is like another disaster, which was New York, which finally they're starting to remedy the whole situation by allowing bigger MSOs to compete in the marketplace.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. And if you want to learn more about the emerging industries that we cover, then leave a comment below and let us know who you want us to interview, the questions you want asked, and the information that you want to learn. We want to hear from you. As usual, click on that bell for all notifications to get the latest information. Share this video with your network, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel, because we would not be here without you. Thanks for watching, everyone.